we've been around Asia. We've looked at Korea, Japan, China, Thailand, Indonesia. We've been sort of all over, but now we're going to be a little bit macro, and dive in individual countries and basically look at the secrets to monetizing in the Asian market. So without further ado, Stephen.
Thanks. Is this thing on? Okay, good. Okay. All right. So, first of all, it's great to be back here in Singapore, especially at Casual Connect, which is definitely a growing and exciting event. So it's really fun to be spending time with a group of really talented and fun people. A couple of things before we actually get into the slides. First of all, I've been told that I speak very, very quickly. So if you guys are having trouble following, just raise your hand. I'll slow down. I just had 2 coffees, so a little bit wired. And the other thing is, if we run out of time, or I try to skip over a couple things, or you have some other questions that we can't get to, please feel free to see me afterwards. I'll be here all day tomorrow as well. And without further ado, I just also want to take a quick survey of the room. How many of you guys are actually game developers? Can you raise your hands? Okay, good. So more than half. And then publishers? Any publishers here? Okay, that's good. And the rest of you are doing user acquisition or something, or advertising? Okay, anyway, cool. It's good to know. So let's get started. Hold on one second. Whoops. Okay, yeah, so first about 6 Waves. We have been in the free-to-play space since 2008. We've basically pioneered Facebook publishing back in the day. We're headquartered in Hong Kong. We have presence in the countries that you see on the map. And we started off on Facebook, where we were the most successful publisher. Also branched out to Yahoo Mobage in Japan, where we remain one of the most successful foreign, non-Japanese companies that are in the publishing business. And more recently, we are re-entering mobile publishing with iOS, Android, and Amazon, and focusing on top grossing chart positions, mainly in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan. All right, so I guess from my point of view, the information that I'll be sharing is more from a publisher's perspective, in particular evaluating for you guys that are developers, what do you guys need to deal with when launching a game in certain Asian markets? What kind of approach should you take? This will be pretty mobile focused. And we had some really, really great content the last 2 days, and mostly at the country level. So, just now with Korea, Georg's presentation was amazing. We had a great Japanese presentation earlier, and some talks about China. What I'll try to do is really highlight things that you may not know about launching a game, and with really trying to keep the developer in mind. All right. So I think, first of all, the most common misconception is the term the Asian market. This term in itself is pretty misleading. So Asia is not one singular market. In fact, it's billions of people in dozens of countries, and in fact, hundreds of languages. So nowhere is this actually better embodied than here in Singapore, where it's actually a pretty interesting blend of different cultures, and you have people that are even switching languages mid-sentence, which I'm still not totally used to. So I think the point is that there is no real single way to success in the entire Asian market. You really have to look at it bit by bit. There is actually no single player that can actually take care of the entire Asian market. If somebody claims that they can do that, they're just not telling the truth. So what I'll try to do now is kind of talk about the approach and how to actually tackle this massive, massive opportunity known as Asia. All right, so the most common question I get from developers is, Stephen, where should I get started? And I think this part is going to be fairly obvious. We'll start with the big 3, China, Japan, and of course, Korea. So let's start with China, which is the world's most populous country. You guys probably know about Tencent, who is basically the dominant player in China. So one of the reasons they are so dominant is they basically control all the online channels in the Chinese market. So there's mobile messaging through WeChat, there's instant messaging on the PC through QQ, the social network called Qzone, they have their own version of Twitter, They've got their own version of YouTube. So basically controlling the entire spectrum. They've done really clever things with promoting games across those different channels. The revenue share that they take is also pretty unfair. If you want to know more about that, I'll talk to you offline. And in fact, if you look at the China top grossing charts, the very, very top grossing games are all studios that actually has been invested in by Tencent. So it's relatively unbalanced. The good news is there's always the iOS App Store, which is growing in relevance. There is also Android. There is no Google Play, as you guys have heard earlier today. So the other thing that you guys might not know about China is how does Android work in China. So some of my fellow peers touched upon this earlier, but I'm going to try to shed some light on this. So it's a pretty complex ecosystem for Android. First of all, you've got the carrier stores, so the 3 major telcos in China, which you see on the left-hand side. You basically have to play ball with all 3 because they are handling carrier payments. So I'd say the biggest driver of revenues in terms of payments is SMS payments. So this is even available offline. So you can actually make a transaction, and then you come back online, and it shows up as an SMS. Just to kind of support all 3 major carriers, that's 3 separate SKUs for developers. So just to enter the China market. All right. On top of that, there are over 400 third-party Android marketplaces. The most famous ones probably 360, Baidu, Tencent, etc. So on top of that, you've got the device store, so individual handset manufacturers like Xiaomi, Huawei, etc. So it's not really possible, nor is it practical, to integrate with every single one of these players. But there is a lot of work to be done to get good coverage in the China market. All right, so a quick word about revenue share. So everyone knows that China has a lot of mobile gaming revenue. Some of you may not know about how the revenue share works. So I won't talk about Tencent, I'll just talk about how that Android rev share works. So you've launched your game in China, that's a huge pie, 100% revenue, not exactly. So if we're talking about the carrier stores, they take 30% right off the top. On top of that, the third-party Android marketplaces take an additional 40%. So that leaves developers and publishers with the remaining 30%. So hopefully that's 50-50, but in actual fact, due to transaction issues and other issues which I can get into later, developers are seeing closer to around 12% of the sort of 100% revenue pie. So this is something that you guys may not know about, and it's an issue to consider when you're thinking about China. So a lot of times when you hear about success stories in China, you hear a lot of information about download numbers. We got X million download numbers, but not a lot of guys are actually talking about revenue numbers, and that's probably because they're actually not seeing a lot of revenue. So something to keep in mind about mainland China. All right, so here's just some quick tips. In general, with China, you want to think about volume. So Android revenue in China is the key driver. There was a report from Digi Capital, the investment bank, recently that said apps in China must have something like 8 times the number of downloads to achieve the same level as iOS. So it's really about trying to get in as many different channels as possible to sort of make up for it by sheer volume. The other thing is find a trustworthy partner. That's easier said than done. It's a lot of work involved to support all the SDKs and channels, and that's a huge barrier to entry. And if you're not careful, you can actually spend most of your time working on these integrations. So the recommendation I would have would be to actually find a partner that you trust and actually let them take care of the integrations for you. The manpower, integration, engineering resources is cheaper in China. These guys already know the SDKs. They're talking to the platforms. Better to let them handle it rather than, and you guys can kind of focus on keeping the game running really smoothly. All right, so let's move on to Japan. So we had a really cool presentation from Dr. Toto earlier. We saw that the Japanese market has higher spend than any other country in the world. The dominant players in Japan, you're probably already aware of. Gung Ho with Puzzle and Dragons, which has been in the market for well over 4 years. And more recently, Mixi with Monster Strike. So they're around 70% of the revenue, but there are also other established players in the market that are actually driving significant results in the Japan market. So, but the point is the dominant players are almost 100% Japanese companies. So out of the top grossing games in Japan, 9 out of 10 are actually Japanese companies. Most of them are here. And actually 22 or 23 out of the top 25 all come from Japan as well. So this is historically probably the toughest market for foreign companies to crack. All right, some of the key market characteristics about Japan that you may not know about. Some of you may know about this one, but can anyone tell me what this image is about? What's going on here? No idea? Wild guess? Somebody said gacha, that is correct, good man. You guys probably know about gacha and how it works, the lucky draw kind of element. But it's actually, if you're combing the charts of the top grossing games in Japan, it's in virtually every single top grossing game. The other thing, so this actually gacha image is the Arkham gacha machine or something from Puzzle & Dragons. So also from Puzzle & Dragons is this screen, which actually brings up 2 more points and 2 more market characteristics of Japan. The first is what they like to call collaborations. Basically, these are crossovers with famous brands and IP. So this is a very clever one that was recently done with DC Comics. So that's the Joker that you're trying to wipe out. And sort of the gacha machine has been changed to sort of a Batman type of outfit. So collaborations and these kind of events and live ops, as we call them, are very, very common. They happen on a weekly basis and sometimes on a daily basis for Japanese games. Japanese players are very passionate about the games that they love. They spend at a very, very high clip. There's actually legislation in place that mandates that they must spend virtual currency within a certain number of days or else that will expire. So they really want to spend money. So one of the reasons why Japanese companies have succeeded for such a long time is they keep cranking out new events and new updates for their loyal players. All right, so some of the other things that happen in addition to that, celebrity voiceovers, people talked about that earlier, lots of updates and events to the game. So if you're not fully invested in these kinds of activities, your chances of success in Japan are quite slim. On top of that, customer service is also critical. So if you're spending a ton of money in the game and you find a bug or you find some server issue, you're going to want that issue repaired ASAP. Otherwise, you're going to probably play something else. All right, so some key tips for Japan. In terms of the adaptation of games, the real outliers are the Western games like Clash of Clans or Candy Crush. So those are really, really simple games that have sort of universal appeal and are really simple to understand. With the exception of those games, everything else is sort of native level in terms of the look and feel, in terms of the wording and everything. So that's quite crucial. Japanese gamers are very sensitive to how the game feels. And if it doesn't feel like a native game, it feels like a foreign game, they'll reject it. All right, so the other thing is you have to kind of bet big to succeed in Japan. So commit heavy to marketing, to updates, as we talked about, to CS. There's a lot of overhead, but significant rewards. And finally, top grossing is actually not everything. So you can actually stay niche, and you'll find a very, very high spending audience for whatever that niche may be. If you're in the top 200 overall, you can actually make pretty good money in Japan. All right, finally, Korea. As Georg just talked about earlier, the dominant players, you've all heard of them, Kakao, Gameville, come to us. More recently, Supercell, which has actually been an outlier because they brute forced the market with marketing spend. But the market characteristics of Korea can kind of be summed up in this one image. This is actually from the top grossing game in Korea at the moment. It's called Raven. It's a very, very high quality ARPG. So it's more of a hardcore culture in Korea. Due to the popularity of like StarCraft, Diablo, and all the games that are really top of the line in terms of the fidelity, the audiovisual quality. So before Raven, there was a game called Blade, which was very, very similar, very sharp, and rivaling console or PC quality on an Android device. So really, really impressive stuff. And I guess surprisingly, another market characteristic is that Western themes actually do have a chance in Korea. So you'll see sort of medieval knights, like Royal Revolt, for example. Western military themes, those are actually still okay. It doesn't have to be anime style like you see in Japan. So that's something that people don't really recognize. And actually, out of the top 10, only let's say 2 or 3 of the top 10 grossing games right now look kind of very Korean in terms of anime style. Everything else actually looks quite Western. So, and this past week, Hearthstone actually broke into the top 10 grossing in Korea. So the final characteristic that I would say is that there's tons of similar games and tons of developers cranking out more and more of these games that are very, very similar. It's very, very competitive, and there's a lot of churn in the top charts. Finally, the little blue button on the bottom of the screen, that actually refers to autoplay, which is a very popular feature that you don't really see in the West, and that's kind of a must-have for most Korean games. All right, so tips for Korea. Try to do something different. The Korean developers know what they like, and there's hundreds of developers doing the same thing, so try to bring something else to it. As I mentioned, Kakao, the top games change all the time. There's dozens of new games every week, so it really takes strong retention to stay on the charts. Otherwise, you'll get that initial push, and then you'll pretty much just sink back down with the other apps. And finally, consider other marketplaces, as we discussed earlier. All right, so what's the conclusion for the big 3? It's very challenging to succeed, almost impossible if you go it alone, with the exception of some of those outliers like Supercell, who can brute force the market. So that's kind of a grim picture. I'd like to kind of finish off with better news. So where else can we look in Asia? We've had a lot of success in Taiwan and Hong Kong. So these are non-obvious options that most people don't think about. And of course, we're here in Southeast Asia, so the big 6, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and also the Philippines. So let's break it down with some quick numbers. So another common misconception is that Taiwan and Hong Kong is part of China. They are not part of China. They're very different from China. Different spoken language, different writing systems. Taiwan and Hong Kong are very, very tiny islands that people just lump in with China. And in actual fact, they're top 10 markets in terms of Google Play revenue, and also knocking on the door of top 10 for iOS too. So most people do not know this. It's really good to keep in mind, and the countries are run properly with no kind of weird markets. So it's a good bet to try these markets. Also, Southeast Asia. So Newzoo just came out with a report that Southeast Asia is in fact the fastest growing region in the gaming industry. So if you look at the very bottom row, the growth rate is projected to be twice that of other so-called high growth, high potential regions. So there's a lot to be excited about. I think we can kind of all see it here at Casual Connect. So how do we tackle the rest of Asia? First of all, I can't stress this enough. Separate Taiwan and Hong Kong from your China publishing deal. You can work with a China publisher. If they're really good in China, chances are they're not spending enough time on Hong Kong and Taiwan. So personally, I mean, for selfish reasons, these are the markets we're looking at. But in actual fact, they're really, really attractive markets with good revenue. Take my word for it. So the second thing is, as you make your game and think about your audience, think about the genre of your game. Where can I actually have the most opportunity for success? Talk to different publishers in different countries in Asia and see what their feedback is. And a lot of them are very happy to share feedback with you. See who's actually committed, who's actually pretty excited about the game, who's willing to put their money where their mouth is. So as a publisher, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but you should definitely try to secure some type of commitment from your publishing partner, whether it be an advance, a guarantee of marketing of some kind. You're really trying to minimize your risk, right? So that's kind of my final point is get commitments from publishers if you can. Find partners who can actually alleviate that risk. So it doesn't make sense for developers to manage 10 different versions of their game for different markets and different countries in Asia. Really work with the right partners. Sometimes they'll even take the work off of your hands. So that's sort of the general approach for Asia, and thank you very much.